talking today about the Spectrolight Flexible Wavelength Selector. If you look in the SPIE catalog for today, it says product demonstration, and that's actually what we're going to show you in a few minutes. It's not just going to be a talk about how great the product is. You'll have to sit through that first. But actually going to show you how it works, show different advantages of this product, and then pass one around, and you'll actually get a real feel then for what a great little product this is. So if we start off, Flexible Wavelength Selector, it's a compact little device. Here's a family photo, 3 different products. By the end of this show, you'll know what each one does. So very briefly, I'm going to tell you what it is because it's a new capability. So I don't just want to show it in action, explain first what it is. What are the applications that can benefit from this unique technology? Briefly, how does it work? The flux capacitors, all the things that are inside it. We'll give you a demo, brief demo showing how it works, how well it works, and then I want to pass this around and you can all look through it and see exactly how it works as an imaging device, and then take any number of questions at the end. But the questions aren't meant just to be at the end. If there's something I say and somebody thinks that's a load of crap, or can you explain that more clearly, please just interrupt. Don't just wait for the end of this. So what's the Flexible Wavelength Selector? It's a compact device. It replaces a monochromator and bandpass filters. Well, why do I want to replace a monochromator and a bandpass filter? Those are pretty proven technologies. Everybody knows what they do, where to source them inexpensively. Because this device combines the advantages of both. The best of a bandpass filter and the best of a monochromator. What do I mean by that? It's got a circular clear aperture like a filter. So I can either pass light through that for the purposes of excitation, illumination, or I can study images through that, put in front of a camera. It's a circular aperture. It's not a slit, it's not a pinhole, it's not a slit imaged onto an array. It's a clear aperture that's uniform. But unlike a bandpass filter, it's got all the wavelength agility of a monochromator. So we've got precision tuning, adjustable bandwidth, just like you would with a monochromator where you could vary the slits or rotate the grating. Sharp cutoff, which is very important if you're looking at things that have a narrow emission or a narrow excitation spectrum. High out of band extinction. People have tried to do what this does before with things like AOTFs and other technologies, and there's often bleed through from overtones and so forth. This has got very high out-of-band rejection, 10 to the 6. And the entire product range covers the extended visible, 350 to 900 nanometers. So what are the applications? Any application that needs filtering of light and that can also benefit where the light is carrying image spatial information. So that's fluorescence microscopy, any kind of filtered illumination where you don't want a laser, maybe you want wide field, non-coherent illumination. So this can be coupled as here to a broadband light source and have a very simple, low-cost source of tunable light. Hyperspectral imaging. Interesting, hyperspectral imaging is a phrase that's thrown around so much these days, but as mammals, we've been doing it for millions of years with our color vision. Hyperspectral imaging tell you where it is, how big it is, and because of the spectral aspect, will tell you what it is. But that's only if the spectral aspect is there. So it's great for that. Machine vision, a lot of times people want to filter the illumination or filter the camera. Instrumentation, I'll talk about an example of that at the end. So a primary application of fluorescence microscopy, you've all seen HeLa cells before. Here's two different fluorochromes, and then a third image combines the two. These were done with white light illumination and a flexible wavelength selector in front of the camera. But with a microscope, you can use this in two ways. You can either put it in the infinity space of the microscope, in other words, in front of the camera, or you can put it between a white light source and the microscope and use it to filter the illumination, or both. So it's perfect for microscopy. Potential applications, we believe, in machine vision. Medical imaging and machine vision are often blurred technologies. This is an example here. We already have an OEM customer in Korea, and they've got a device called the vein probe. A big problem, particularly for the very young or very old, when they're having medical treatment, is where are the veins. If you want to do an intravenous procedure, you need to find that vein. If you want to do an aesthetic procedure, you're going to have to avoid those veins. Everybody's venal details are different. So it's a challenge across medicine to know where the subcutaneous veins, and this device, simply by using they use this device to produce narrowband near infrared, and then the same technologies in front of a camera to just image one band with the near infrared. This product's actually in our booth at 8739, although we don't sell this product. I think it's a great demonstration of the capability. And for those of you who are animal lovers, an interesting aspect of this that I find fascinating is it will image through hair, so it'll image through fur. So when you take your dog or your cat to the vet, they no longer have to shave half the damn animal to find the the vein. That can just image right through the coat. How does it work? Magic. No. We call this twin film technology. There's been a lot of advances in thin film coating technology in recent years. Most strikingly, IBS. IBS coatings are fully densified dielectric coatings. And one of the advantages of that is they don't shift with time, they don't shift with temperature, they don't shift with humidity. But you can set very precise spectral characteristics. So if you take one bandpass filter, plot the transmission against wavelength, you've got this standard narrow band. If you tilt that filter, you'll move that band. Now if you take two of those filters, I've now a way to set the bandwidth and to move the transmission. So by moving them relative to each other, I adjust the bandwidth, and then moving them in a concerted way, we sweep the wavelength. So it's a very, very simple, it's patented now, but it's a very simple optomechanical device. You've got two dielectric bandpass filters, because when you rotate a plate in a light beam, you're going to get a walk-off effect. And if people are doing imaging, they don't want to walk off. So then we have a third plate, which is twice the thickness of these two, which automatically corrects for any lateral displacement as you change the wavelength. So it's as simple as that. That's what we call twin film technology. Here's a photo of one of these with the cover off. You can see first filter, second filter, the offset plate. They're all direct drive, micro-step-in, little stepper motors. So there's no play, no backlash, no loss of calibration. So once the device is calibrated, you know exactly where the wavelength is. So to recap over the advantages, we've got a clear uniform aperture. I know I keep emphasizing that, but whenever people think of any kind of spectral instrumentation, I'm saying that we're covering spectroscopists, you think of some device with a slit or a pinhole that defines the wavelength. The wavelength's defined here internally, so the entire aperture is uniform. You can tune the wavelength, or you could set the wavelength. A lot of times, you know you're using a known situation, a green fluorescent protein. You know exactly where you want to excite, you know exactly where you want to see the emission, but you might have a new fluorophore. So you might want to be able to sweep the wavelength as you're taking your data. Adjustable bandwidth, set it from anywhere from 1.5 nanometers, full width half max, all the way to 20 nanometers. Sharp cutoff, that's important if somebody was doing something like Raman or anything that involves a resonance. High out of band rejection, 10 to the 6th. So, much like a monochromator, but with a clear imaging aperture. Now I'm going to show you a demonstration of how it works, but does anybody have any questions about it? The demonstration here just shows it filtering a light source. It's one of our own light sources, a tiny compact device called the Mighty Light. So this setup you've got to imagine is a laboratory now. So you can all see it from there. And like a typical academic laboratory, you have to have a grad student to do all the work. So I've got Solomon here to play the role of the grad student. I'll just take the glory. We've got a white light here. It's collimated. That's an important distinction of this device. It's got to have collimated input and output, which is fine in a microscope. Obviously, the infinity space is a prime spot for this in a microscope where the light is already fully collimated. I've got a beam split here, sending part of the light into one of our spectrometers, 2048 array spectrometer, and I've just put this little white screen in so you can actually see the wavelength. Could you make it scan, Salman? So it's starting, we'll set the scan up so it'll be very obvious unless you're colorblind. You can see how it's going all the way from 560 out beyond 600. Can you make it scan? Do that again. I know it's probably hard to see from the back row. Yes.
What's that little peak at 610? You promised 26
That's the spectrometer looking at the mercury lights. It's not fiber coupled, it's just free space. See, it's going straight from the filter, the beam splitter, into the monochromator. No, that's fine. I used to use those lights to calibrate spectrometers. It's the mercury lamp. So the mercury line is one there and one there. If we had sodium, it would be showing up in the yellow at 5, around here. Good question, though, isn't it? I was wondering at first what that was, then we realized it was picking up the mercury lamps. So that's it. Whilst I've got you here all captive, this entire setup is all Spectrolight equipment. The light source, the collimator, all the optomechanics, lightweight breadboard. One of the problems with lightweight breadboards is if you want to put something magnetic on them, it doesn't stick. But this does because it's actually a hybrid of aluminum and steel. So we've got the magnetic properties of steel and then the lightweight of aluminum. Magnetic base, it's easy to pick things up. Now this is a manual one. I want to pass this around, but I would like it back at the end. There's 3 controls here. You've got the direct rotation instead of the motors you saw in the presentation. You can control the 2 filters and then the offset. Obviously, if you take the 2 filters and you set them for different wavelengths, you'll get no transmission at all. So as a test, I ask that you turn them both clockwise and then look through it, and then turn them both counterclockwise and look through it, and you're seeing the same scene, only set with a 70 nanometer shift in the wavelength you actually observe it. If you're interested, let me pass this around now. I'll start with you. Oh, shit. Am I still live? Yeah. If you're interested in, I'm sure some of you, hopefully potential OEMs, if you come by the booth at 8739, you'll see we have a first instrument actually using this. It's a fluorimeter, and this particular fluorimeter is configured to look at new dyes, so it accepts cuvettes. And because of the agility of the flexible wavelength selector, we can scan the excitation spectrum as a function of emission, or scan the emission spectrum as a function of excitation, which is exactly the information biologists need today when they're looking at new fluoroprobes. That's it, I got around very quickly. Anybody got any questions? I knew you would ask that. We have products. He wants to know what the tuning range was. Was it really 350 to 900? That's the question, right? We have products that cover the range 350 to 900, but no one device at this time will cover that whole range. We have a roadmap to that device, but we don't have it yet. It is designed, it's just not built. But right now, the longest one we have, I think, is 120 nanometers, the longest range. But yeah, obviously people would like to have most of the visible. I think most microscopists would like to have most of the visible. So that's a roadmap product. Yes, yeah, you're exactly right. Right now, the longer wavelength ones in the red and the infrared are up to 120 plus, where the ones in the blue, you're probably an optical engineer, you have 60 degrees of rotation. So you can, I think 900, am I right? Dr. Yang, who actually invented the device, is sitting here making a videotape. So at 900 is the longest. And that vein probe that we showed you earlier, that the sister company over in Korea is making, the medical company, they will not release the wavelength range, but that's well into the NIR. Their device, a prototype, is in our booth, and you can't see the light when you put your hand in to see your vein structure. It's certainly beyond the eye range. So nominally 350 to 900. As you're looking through it, you have to rotate them both the same way, or you'll end up crossing them. Anybody else got any questions? What was the, sorry? You mean that you're talking about the bandwidth or the tuning range? The bandwidth. We don't have a product more than 20 now. We could do more than 20. The inventor says we can do more than 20, yes. So you said maybe 40 nanometers? Okay, yes, we can do that.
Out of curiosity, why do you call it Flexible Wavelength Selector and not Tunable Wavelength Selector? Is there any reason why you put it
because there's been tunable devices before. There's a device, electro-optic device called an AOTF, the acousto-optic tunable filter. It does some of the functionality of this. It's more complex, it's more costly, and it has some drawbacks. I'm not saying this product's perfect. Every product has its limitations. But the problem with the AOTF is you can't change the bandwidth. The bandwidth scales with the wavelength. And other exotic things that people have tried to use to make this kind of effect, you've never had the independent ability to vary the bandwidth and the wavelength. As the gentleman just there noted, the tuning range scales with wavelength in the simple format we've got here, but we've got a different format that'll have a longer range. But that's why we call it flexible, because it's It's not just tunable, it's adjustable bandwidth and tunable, and we don't want to give a product 5 words to describe it. So that's why it's called flexible and not tunable. It's more than just tunable.
What about polarization?
Dr. Yang, it's not polarization dependent, if that's what you... It is not. The polarization bias is
No problem.
less than 2%. So obviously that's something you can calibrate out. Because that's one of the drawbacks of the liquid crystal filter, which some microscopists use. It functions only with limited polarized light. And so if that polarization vector shifts, but here, I think the difference between S&P is like 2%. And obviously that's something that's fixed, so you could calibrate it out if you integrated it into a polarimeter instrument. Any other questions? Great, well, feel free to come by 8739. We got a lady there taking orders. If you've got a credit card, she'll be happy to process your order this afternoon. I thank you for your time and wish you a successful show.